Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammadin wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. I'm recording this video in response to three questions that were sent in by one of the Muslim brothers who is a GP in Birmingham, who asked some questions following on from the talk or the short video I did on Islamic viewpoint on mental illness, schizophrenia and depression. The first question was about nafs, mind, heart, etc., and whether this can cause mental illness. I understand mental illness like schizophrenia, bipolar, etc. can have other causes, genetic, environment, unclear causes. But what about using the broader term of mental health difficulties? I would like to raise this question: can imbalance of these things cause mental health difficulties? The reason why I ask is sometimes I see people who struggle with their internal desires, nafs, and heart, anger, jealousy, which can lead to distress, anxiety, arguments, family problems. I think that's correct. If we broaden the definition of mental illness and mental disorder, practically anything can come under the definition of mental disorder, which, if you read the classifications by ICD, International Classification of Disorders, or the DSM-4, you'll see that a lot of things come under mental disorder. According to psychological understanding, the human being can experience mental distress in two main ways, two main emotions, which are anxiety and depression. Anger is a third emotion, which doesn't really normally lead to mental illness or mental distress, but can cause anger outbursts, anger management problems, where people are unable to control their anger and may act when very angry and do things that they regret. But it's not normally a more sustained mental distress. It's something that comes and then goes when the anger subsides. With the other two emotions, depression and anxiety, these can be much more sustained and cause long-term chronic mental distress. These are definitely to do with diseases of the heart. Someone who has undergone spiritual purification and as a consequence strengthen their iman and their yaqeen, their faith and their certainty, they will suffer less from these type of mental distress. Because in fact Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, Inna awliya Allahi la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. The people, the friends, the people who are close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they do not suffer fear and nor do they suffer grief. So khawf is fear, which is the same thing as anxiety, because anxiety is a fear of the future, and huzn or grief is depression or sadness. So it's interesting that actually the Quran over 1400 years ago mentioned these two fundamental emotional states which can take the human being into a state of mental imbalance or mental illness. La khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. They don't suffer anxiety, nor do they suffer depression. These are the people of God, the people who are close to God, the people who have a strong iman and a strong certainty. Having said that, I don't rule out the fact that there are certain forms of depression which, and possibly anxiety as well, which may be due to a physical cause. As we mentioned before, severe depression can be due to a physical imbalance in the body. Um, so when someone falls into that state of physical imbalance, in the past it was known as an imbalance of humors, which we don't really prescribe to that theory anymore, but it was a useful model just to understand the concept that the physical constitution of the human being has fallen into an imbalance, leading to this state of severe depression in which both the physical body and the mental state becomes very slowed down. So in that sense, I'd say that diseases, spiritual disease, or disease of the heart as they're known in Islamic tasawwuf, can definitely lead to types of mental distress. Envy, as you mentioned, jealousy or envy, hasad, is definitely something that can lead to a lot of distress, mental distress. Even in the English language, you have the phrase that someone is consumed by envy. And this is something that we recognize as well. Envy being something that can, if remains unchecked, can increase and increase to such an extent that it can overtake a person's whole being. And the surah from the Quran, Surah Yusuf, is a surah that gives us a lot of teaching and lessons and insights into the nature of envy, and how also the human being can become deluded. Because the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, they had this disease, but they also justified it to themselves. Because when they came to because what did they say? They said, our father is favoring Yusuf and his brother, and our father is surely astray. So see how they justified, see how it worked within them. They didn't just feel envy, they were able to justify that cognitively to themselves. And this is how shaitan tricks human beings and comes between human beings. Because they didn't just say, oh, we feel envy towards Yusuf. No. They said our father is has gone astray by the way he's dealing with us. So despite knowing that their father was a great prophet, Shaitan had put this thought into their head, and this thought grew and grew and grew until they became consumed by this thought. And so the Quran says, in the end, when they repented, and the Prophet Yusuf alayhi salam, he says, praise and thanks be to Allah, I'm just paraphrasing, who has brought us together after Shaitan had tried to come between my brothers and myself. The next question was about punishment and depression, and about the idea of trials and tribulation and the washing away of sins. And you mentioned, I think it's a hadith from Tirmidhi, when Allah wills good for a servant of His, He expedites His punishment in this life, and when He wills retribution for a servant of His, He holds his sin for him to judge on the day of resurrection. So the questioner is asking, if one of your patients says to you, doctor, my depression may be a cause of punishment, and they ask, doctor, is this correct? How should we respond? Clearly only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can say this is punishment, and not us, but this may be a way of washing sins. Can we say depression may be a cause of punishment, but only Allah knows? But it is chance to wash away sins and wish good with less punishment in hereafter. Yes, I think you have approximately got the correct answer. This is, comes into Islamic theology and Aqidah. As the Prophet ﷺ has been mentioned in many hadith, that any tribulation or difficulty that comes upon the believer in this world is a source of blessing for them. Because, and he said, even if a thorn pricks the believer, even if a thorn pricks the believer, it will be washing away their sins. So all of us commit sins. None of us except for the prophets are ma'asum, who do not commit sins. So we know that all of us commit sins. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says that if He were to take us to account for our actions, all of human beings would have been in the hellfire. So none of us deserve to go to Jannah except by His mercy. So any affliction, any tribulation should be taught in this way, that if someone is a believer and they have sabr, they are patient through that tribulation, this is a source of great reward and coming closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We know that the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the people who are the most tested in this world are the Anbiya, the prophets. They're given the most tribulations. Is this because Allah is punishing them or Allah hates them? No. They are the most beloved of all human beings to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's very clear that having tribulations, be it illness, be it mental illness, be it physical illness, be it loss of life or limb or wealth, it is very clear that tribulation does not mean it is a punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Otherwise the prophets would not have been those that are given the most tribulations. Look at the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He was an orphan. He lost his father before he was born. He lost his mother when he was young. He lost his grandfather when he was young. All of his children died in his own lifetime except for Sayyidah Fatima radiallahu anha. What is more greater tribulation for a parent than having your children die? What is a more greater tribulation for a parent than having your sons? All of his sons died in their infancy. He underwent severe economic sanctions when they were in Mecca for 3 years, to the point when some of the Sahaba were eating leaves from trees and they had to tie rocks around their stomachs through severe hunger. These were the tribulations that the Prophet ﷺ underwent. Was it because it's a punishment? No. It's because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving him a huge amount of reward and raising him in front of him in great ranks. So the reward and the ranks that come through tribulation is much higher than comes through doing acts of worship. And this is the secret why the people who are closest to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones who are given the greatest tribulations. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us the tawfiq to have patience in the light of tribulations and tests. So this is what you can tell your patients. Remind them of the stories of the prophets and say to them, don't fall into despair. Don't believe that Allah is punishing you or is angry with you. As long as you have sabr and patience, this is a great blessing. This can be a great blessing of wiping away your sins and raising you and earning a huge amount of reward and thawab in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The third question was about jinn possession. It says, I understand the context by Christian, as you mentioned. Jinn can affect people. I do not believe possession can cause mental illness such as depression, schizophrenia, etc. But most presentations are not related to jinn but mental health issues. My question is, how is this recognized? Can possession cause behavioral problems, agitation, distress, chaotic behavior? Based on this, can possession cause mental health problems? It's a good question, and I'd start by saying I do not know the definitive answers to this question. I can only base on my own study, learning, and experience of having seen cases of supposed jinn possession taking place several times, and accompanied very pious brothers who do ruqya, and also having studied or being in the process of studying a degree in medical anthropology, which looks at the phenomenon of spirit possession in many different cultures throughout the world. All I can say is that I do believe there is such a thing as black magic, which is known as sahar, which is clearly mentioned in the Quran and authentic hadiths. The Quran says that this black magic can lead to a man and wife being separated. But the Quran says that no one can be harmed by black magic except by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it's not for believers to become scared or fearful or anxious about these things, but rather to trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا هُمْ بِضَارِينَ مِنْ أَحَدٍ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِ اللَّهِ. These people who practice black magic cannot harm anyone except by the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's very clear in the Quran. According to some theories, or that as Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah mentions, that black magic takes effect through the use of jinn. As for actual jinn possessing human beings, meaning that the jinn, the entity of the jinn, can take over the consciousness of the human being, and so actually the jinn will be speaking, the jinn will be moving. I still am not convinced that this can happen. Some of the very respected teachers that I studied with, they believe that this can and does happen. Some of the very respected teachers, one of them that I studied with, he does not believe that this is possible. So what I would say is this not clearly in the Quran or the authentic hadith that such a thing can take place. Some theories that I am currently studying include the idea that jinn possession, what manifests as jinn possession, as we widely experience in the Muslim world and in non-Muslim cultures such as Indian, Hindu culture, across Africa, in China, in many different cultures. In fact, it seems to be a worldwide phenomenon where people experience spirit possession and they behave and talk in different voices, etc. Whether this is a real possession by spirits or whether this is a type of hypnotic state, because a person who is hypnotized also believes that their actions are not under their own control. You can hypnotize someone and you can make them believe that their arm is being pulled up by a lever, and they will raise their arm and they actually believe, truly believe, that their arm is being lifted up by a lever. And some very recent studies have been done using neuroimaging to show that they actually do believe that their arm is being lifted by an external force, and that is under a hypnotic state. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. I do not know the answer to that question. I hope that anyway that has helped somewhat to answer those questions. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us all tawfiq, increase us in knowledge and understanding of this deen. Wa sallallahu ala sayyidil mursaleen wa alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. Walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Please continue to send in your questions. I'm sorry there's a delay in answering some of them. But I do actually like to have questions on this subject be sent in to me and comments that people may have. Jazakumullah khairan wa salamu alaikum.